There are stories that remind us why we keep going. This is one of them. A tale set in the American West of the 1880s, when the land was wide and the choices were few. It's about a woman who traveled 1,000 miles for a promise that was broken before she even arrived. And it's about a man who had forgotten how to speak to another human being until he saw her sitting alone at a train station. This story doesn't have gunfights or villains. It has something harder to find: two people learning to trust again after the world gave them every reason not to. If you've ever felt passed over, forgotten, or left waiting for something that never came, this story is for you. Sometimes the best things in life arrive when we've stopped expecting them. Pull up a chair. Let's begin. The letter said he wasn't coming. Clara Whitmore read it again, her eyes tracking the same lines for the 4th time, as if the words might rearrange themselves into something different. They didn't. The ink remained fixed on the paper, neat and final, like a door closing. Upon further consideration, I find that our arrangement no longer suits my circumstances. I wish you well in your future endeavors. No apology, no explanation beyond circumstances. Just 12 words to undo everything she'd built her hopes upon for the past 3 months. She folded the letter and slipped it back into her pocket. Her fingers brushed the worn fabric there, the same pocket where she'd kept his first letter. The one filled with promises about the ranch, the life they'd build, the children they might have someday. That letter she'd burned on the train somewhere past St. Louis. The wooden crate beneath her was growing harder by the hour. 3 hours now since the train had pulled away in a cloud of steam and noise, leaving her here on this platform with everything she owned packed into a single trunk. 3 dresses. Her mother's Bible. A photograph so faded you could barely make out the woman's face anymore. The sun pressed down like a hot iron on cloth. Sweat gathered at the back of her neck, soaking into her collar. Her calico dress, the blue one she'd chosen, because the advertisement said Mr. Harrison preferred modest colors, clung to her skin in all the wrong places. She should move, find shade, ask someone for help. But where would she go, and who would she ask? The station was small, barely more than a wooden building with a platform and a hand-painted sign that read, Willow Creek, in letters already peeling from the weather. A telegraph machine clicked somewhere inside, the only sign of life besides the flies circling her head. "Mighty hot day to be sitting out here, miss." Clara looked up. An old man stood a few feet away, holding a tin cup that caught the light. His face was weathered like old leather, creased with lines that spoke of decades under this same punishing sun. The station master, she guessed, from the faded badge pinned crookedly to his vest. "You got folks coming?" he asked. Clara opened her mouth, closed it. What was she supposed to say? I thought I did. I traveled 12 days on a train because a man I'd never met promised to marry me. And now I'm sitting on a crate in a town I can't find on a map, with $4 to my name and nowhere to go. I thought I did, she said instead. The old man Buford, according to the name stitched on his pocket, let out a slow breath. He handed her the cup. The water was warm, but clean. "Well," he said, scratching the back of his neck, "I reckon that's the sorriest thing I heard all week." Clara almost laughed. Almost. The sound caught somewhere in her chest and stayed there, hard and tight like a stone she couldn't swallow. "Thank you for the water," she said. Buford nodded and shuffled back toward the station building, leaving her alone again with the heat and the silence and the letter in her pocket. She drank the water slowly, making it last. Her mother had taught her that never gulp when you can sip. Clara, you don't know when the next drink is coming. Good advice for a girl who grew up in a 2-room apartment above a tailor's shop in Philadelphia. Good advice for a woman sitting alone at a train station in the middle of nowhere. The sound of hooves made her look up. A carriage was coming down the main road, black and polished, pulled by 2 horses that gleamed like they'd never seen a speck of dust in their lives. Clara's heart jumped despite herself. Maybe he'd changed his mind. Maybe the carriage rolled past without slowing. But not before she saw the crest painted on the door, a stylized H surrounded by cattle horns, Harrison Ranch. She'd seen it described in his letters, back when he still bothered to write things that mattered. The carriage disappeared around a bend in the road, and Clara watched it go. She watched until there was nothing left to see but the dust settling back onto the street. He wasn't coming. He was never coming. She looked down at her hands. They were gripping the edge of the crate so hard her knuckles had gone white. A splinter had worked its way under the nail of her right thumb. She could feel it there. A small, sharp pain that seemed almost fitting. She didn't pull it out. Instead, she sat there on her wooden crate in the middle of a town she didn't know, in a territory she'd never seen, with a future that had collapsed into nothing between one breath and the next. The sun continued its slow crawl across the sky. The telegraph clicked inside the station, somewhere in the distance. A dog barked once and then fell silent. Clara Whitmore did not cry. She had promised herself on the train that she wouldn't cry, no matter what happened, and she intended to keep that promise. Crying was for girls who still believed someone would come to save them. She was 26 years old. She had $4, 3 dresses, and a splinter in her thumb. And she had absolutely no idea what she was going to do next. Across the street, in the shadow of a wooden post, a man stood with his hat pulled low. He'd been there for nearly an hour, though he couldn't have explained why. He'd come into town for rope and salt, same errands he ran every month, regular as clockwork. Simple things, the kind of thing that shouldn't take more than 20 minutes. But he hadn't moved. Hadn't bought the rope. Hadn't bought the salt. He just stood there, watching the woman on the crate, and felt something stir in his chest that he hadn't felt in a very long time. Something that felt almost like recognition. Some folks say the best stories find us right when we need them most. If this one's finding you today, we'd be honored to know, where are you reading from? Drop a comment below and let's keep each other company, the way good neighbors do. Silas needed rope and salt, that was all. 20 minutes, maybe less. He'd been standing here for an hour. The wooden post pressed against his shoulder blade, rough through his shirt. His horse waited at the hitching rail behind him, occasionally stamping at flies. Across the street, the woman on the crate hadn't moved. He watched her read the letter again, watched her fold it with fingers that trembled just slightly, watched her slip it back into her pocket like she was burying something. His throat was dry. The saloon was right there, 10 feet to his left, and he could hear glasses clinking inside, smell the sawdust and spilled whiskey through the open door. But his boots wouldn't move in that direction. They wouldn't move at all. The woman looked up when the old station master brought her water. Silas saw her mouth move, saw her shoulders pull inward like she was trying to make herself smaller. He knew that posture. He'd worn it himself, years ago, sitting on the porch of his parents' house the day after they put his mother in the ground. The carriage rolled past Harrison's carriage. Black and gleaming. Ridiculous in all that dust. The woman's head turned to follow it. Something in her face shifted. Not hope dying. Exactly. More like hope confirming what she'd already known. Silas finally pushed off from the post. His legs carried him into the saloon before he could think better of it. "Whiskey," he said. Mac poured without looking up. "Ain't seen you in a while." "Been busy." Silas wrapped his hand around the glass but didn't lift it. Through the window, he could still see her. "That gal out there, what's her story?" Mac snorted. "Harrison's mail order. Came all the way from Philadelphia. I hear. He sent word this morning he ain't taking her. Said she ain't got no family name worth having." The whiskey sat untouched. Silas stared at it, at the amber catching the light. "You sweet on her already?" Mac asked. "Just askin'." Movement outside. Silas looked up. The woman had stood. She was trying to lift her trunk, a heavy thing. Oak and brass, built for a different life than this one. She got it a few inches off the ground. Her arms shook. The trunk tilted. She stumbled. Silas set down the glass. The whiskey rippled once and went still. He was already moving toward the door. Silas stopped at the station building first. The old man was inside, bent over a telegraph machine, tapping out something in a rhythm that sounded like rain on a tin roof. He looked up when Silas's shadow fell across the counter. "Help you." "The woman outside." Silas kept his voice low, though there was no one else to hear. "What's her name?" Buford's eyes narrowed. He'd been working this station for 20 years, and he knew trouble when he saw it. But he also knew Silas had sold him salt and rope and the occasional bag of flour for the better part of 3 years. Never a complaint, never a harsh word, just a quiet man who came into town when he needed supplies and left as soon as he had them. "Whitmore," Buford said finally. "Clara Whitmore. Why you askin', son?" Silas didn't answer. He was already turning toward the door. The sun had dropped lower while he was inside. The light was different now, softer, almost golden. The kind that made everything look like it was dipped in honey. The woman was still there, standing beside her fallen trunk. She'd given up trying to lift it. Her hands hung at her sides, and there was something in the set of her shoulders that made Silas think of a horse that had been ridden too hard for too long. He walked toward her. His boots crunched on the gravel. She heard him coming and turned, and when she saw him approaching, she took a step back. Her heel caught on the edge of the platform, and for a moment she wobbled. "Miss Whitmore." She steadied herself. Her eyes moved over him, taking in the dust on his clothes. The worn leather of his belt, the way his hat sat low on his forehead. He could almost see her deciding whether he was a threat. "Do I know you?" "No, ma'am." He pulled off his hat. It seemed like the right thing to do. "Name's Silas. I got a place about half a day's ride west of here. Small ranch. Just me." She waited. The silence stretched between them like a wire pulled taut. "I heard what happened," he said. "With Harrison." Something flickered in her eyes. Her chin lifted. "News travels fast in small towns." "It does." More silence. A fly buzzed past his ear, and he resisted the urge to swat at it. In the distance, the dog barked again 3 times this time. Then nothing. "I could use some help," Silas said. "Around the place. Cooking, cleaning, that sort of thing. Ain't much to look at. but it's got 4 walls and a roof that mostly doesn't leak." He paused. "I can offer room and board, nothing else. No promises beyond that." Clara's eyes narrowed. "You do this often, picking up strays at the station." "First time. That's supposed to make me feel better." "It's the truth. Figured that counts for something." She stared at him. He could see her working through it, the options she had, which weren't many, and the options she didn't have, which were most of them, most. The sun continued its slow descent. In another hour, it would be dark. "Why me?" she asked. "You don't know me from Adam." The question hung there. Silas turned it over in his mind, looking for an answer that wouldn't sound foolish. He thought about the saloon, the whiskey he hadn't drunk, the way he'd stood at that window watching her like a man who'd forgotten how to do anything else. "Reckon I know what it's like," he said finally. "Sitting somewhere, nobody's coming for you." Clara's expression shifted. Just slightly, just around the edges, but enough that he noticed. She looked at him differently after that, not like he was a threat, but like he was something she couldn't quite figure out. "You vouch for this man." The voice came from behind him. Buford had stepped out onto the platform, his arms crossed over his chest. "I do," the old man said. "He's a good man, miss. Quiet, but good. Ain't never caused no trouble." Clara looked from Buford to Silas and back again. The sun was lower now, touching the tops of the buildings across the street. The golden light had turned to orange, and long shadows stretched across the platform like fingers reaching for something they couldn't quite grasp. She looked at her trunk, at the crate she'd been sitting on for hours, at the station building and the empty street, and the sec that was slowly bleeding into reds and purples. Then she looked at Silas. "All right, then," she said. The words came out quieter than he expected, like she was making a promise to herself more than to him. Silas bent and picked up her trunk. It was heavier than it looked, but he didn't let his face show it. He carried it to his buckboard, which was parked at the end of the street, and set it in the back beside the empty sacks he'd meant to fill with salt and rope. When he turned around, Clara was standing a few feet away. She hadn't followed him. She was waiting. He walked back to her and held out his hand. "Need help getting up?" She looked at his hand, at the calluses that covered his palm, the dirt under his nails, the small scar that curved across the base of his thumb like a crescent moon. He'd gotten that scar years ago, from a piece of wire that had snapped while he was mending a fence. It had bled for an hour before it finally stopped. Clara studied that scar for a long moment, long enough that Silas started to wonder if she'd changed her mind. Then she placed her hand in his. Her fingers were cool despite the heat. Small, but not fragile. The hand of a woman who had worked for what she had, even if what she had wasn't much. He helped her up onto the seat. The buckboard creaked under her weight. She settled herself, smoothing her skirt over her knees, and didn't look at him. Silas climbed up beside her. He took the reins in his hands. The leather was warm from the sun, familiar against his palms. 4 hours, he said. Maybe 5 if the trail's washed out. Clara nodded, but said nothing. He clicked his tongue, and the horse began to move. The buckboard lurched forward, wheels grinding against the packed dirt of the street. Behind them, the station grew smaller. Buford raised a hand in farewell, and Silas lifted 2 fingers from the reins in response. They rode in silence. The town fell away, replaced by open land that stretched to the horizon in every direction. Grass the color of wheat, wildflowers here and there, purple and yellow against the brown, the sky enormous above them, bigger than any sky Clara had ever seen. She sat rigid beside him, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes fixed on the road ahead. Silas wondered what she was thinking. He wondered if she was already regretting her decision. He wondered if he was making a mistake, bringing a stranger into his home, into his life. But he didn't turn back. The sun continued to sink, and the shadows grew longer. And somewhere ahead of them, a coyote began to howl. Clara turned to look back once. The town was already shrinking behind them, the buildings growing smaller with each rotation of the wheels, the station house, the saloon, the water tower with its rusted tank. Soon they were just shapes against the horizon. Then smudges. Then nothing at all. She faced forward again. The land ahead stretched out like an ocean made of grass, endless and empty, rolling in waves that seemed to move even when the wind was still. She had never seen anything like it in Philadelphia. You could walk 5 minutes in any direction and hit a wall, a building, another human being. Here, you could walk for days and touch nothing but air. The buckboard creaked beneath her. The wheels found every rut and rock in the trail, jolting her sideways, jarring her teeth together. She gripped the edge of the seat to keep from sliding. Silas held the reins loosely, his hands resting on his thighs. He hadn't spoken since they left town. His eyes were fixed on the trail ahead, but there was something distant in them, like he was looking at something she couldn't see. A hawk circled overhead, riding the currents of warm air that rose from the prairie. Clara watched it spiral higher and higher until it was just a speck against the blue. "You live alone out there?" she asked. "Yep." The word fell between them like a stone dropped into a well. Clara waited for more. Nothing came. The hawk disappeared into the glare of the sun. "You always this talkative?" Silas's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. "Nope, sometimes I'm worse." Clara let out a breath that might have been a laugh in another life. "Lord have mercy." They rode on. The sun beat down, relentless, and sweat gathered at her hairline and trickled down the back of her neck. Her dress was already damp, clinging to her skin in ways that made her want to crawl out of her own body. She'd chosen this dress for a man who never came. Now she was wearing it for a stranger who barely spoke. The trail curved around a low hill, and suddenly the landscape changed. A line of trees appeared in the distance, following the path of what must have been a creek or stream. Cottonwoods, she thought, though she couldn't be sure. Their leaves caught the light and turned it silver. Silas angled the buckboard toward the trees. The horse picked up its pace, sensing water. "We'll rest here a spell," Silas said. "Horse needs a drink." He pulled the buckboard to a stop near the edge of the stream. The water was clear enough to see the bottom-smooth stones in shades of white and gray, worn round by years of current. Minnows darted between them, flashing like coins tossed into a fountain. Silas climbed down and walked around to her side. He held out his hand. Clara hesitated. She could get down on her own. She'd been getting in and out of carriages and wagons her whole life without anyone's help. But there was something in the way he offered not insistent, not demanding, just there that made her reach out and take it. His fingers closed around hers, warm and rough, the calluses scraping against her palm. She stepped down, and for a moment they stood close enough that she could smell the dust on his clothes. The faint tang of sweat. Something underneath that might have been leather or hay. Then he let go and stepped back. And the moment passed like a cloud moving across the sun. "I'll see to the horse," he said. "There's food in the box under the seat. Help yourself." Clara found the box while Silas led the horse to the stream. Inside were the supplies he must have brought from town, though not the rope and salt he'd mentioned. Instead, there was bread wrapped in cloth, a block of cheese coated in wax, and a canteen that sloshed when she lifted it. She carried the food to a flat rock near the water and sat down. The stone was warm beneath her, heated by the sun. She could feel it through her skirt, through her petticoat, all the way to her skin. The bread was dry, the cheese hard. But she ate anyway. She hadn't realized how hungry she was until she took the first bite. Her stomach cramped around it, demanding more. Silas came back after the horse had drunk its fill. He sat down on the rock beside her, not too close, but not far either. Close enough that she could have reached out and touched his arm if she'd wanted to. She didn't. "Cheese?" she asked, holding out the block. He took it, broke off a piece, handed it back. His fingers brushed hers in the exchange. Just the tips. Just for a moment. Clara pulled her hand back as if she'd touched a hot stove. They ate in silence. The stream burbled beside them, a soft, constant sound that filled the space where conversation should have been. Birds called from the cottonwoods. A dragonfly hovered over the water, its wings catching the light like stained glass. Clara watched Silas from the corner of her eye. He ate methodically, chewing each bite thoroughly before swallowing. There was nothing hurried about him, nothing nervous. He moved like a man who had learned to live with silence so long that he'd forgotten it could be broken. "How long?" she asked. He looked at her. "How long what? Since you've had anyone to talk to?" The question hung in the air between them. Silas looked down at the cheese in his hand, turning it over as if searching for an answer written in the wax. "My pa passed last winter," he said finally. "Before that, it was just him and me. And before that," he stopped, shook his head. "Long time." Clara nodded. She understood more than he knew. Her mother had died 3 years ago, coughing up blood into a handkerchief she'd embroidered herself. After that, there had been the boarding house, the factory, the endless parade of days that all looked the same. No one to talk to. No one who cared whether she spoke at all. "I'm sorry," she said. "About your pa—" Silas shrugged. The movement was small, contained, like everything else about him. He was ready, tired of hurtin'. They finished eating in silence. Clara drank from the canteen. The water was warm but clean, and passed it to Silas. He drank without wiping the rim first. Such a small thing. But she noticed. "We should get movin'," he said. "Still got a few hours before dark." He stood and offered his hand again. This time, Clara took it without hesitation. He pulled her to her feet, and for just a moment, they stood face to face, closer than strangers should be. His eyes were brown. She realized, a deep brown, like coffee left too long on the stove. There were lines around them, carved by sun and wind and years of squinting at horizons. He wasn't handsome, not in the way she'd imagined when she'd read Harrison's letters, but there was something in his face that made her want to keep looking. She climbed back onto the buckboard. Silas took his place beside her and gathered the reins. This time, when the wagon lurched forward. Clara didn't grip the seat so tightly, and when the trail narrowed and Silas had to move closer to make room for a passing rock, she didn't pull away. They rode on toward the setting sun. An hour passed, maybe more. The light turned golden, then orange, then a deep red that painted the prairie in colors she'd never seen before. The sky was on fire, and they were driving straight into it. Silas. He glanced at her. Yeah. What made you come over to the station, really? He was quiet for so long that she thought he wasn't going to answer. The wheels turned. The horse walked on. The sun sank lower. I don't rightly know, he said at last. Saw you sitting there. And he shook his head. Couldn't walk away. Clara looked at him, at his profile against the burning sky, the set of his jaw, the way his hands held the reins. Why not? Silas turned to meet her eyes. And in that moment, in that fading light, she saw something in his face that made her breath catch in her chest. Because you looked like someone who'd been waiting a long time, he said. And nobody should have to wait that long alone. The buckboard crested a small rise, and suddenly Clara could see it a dark shape against the red horizon. Still miles away, but unmistakable. A house. His house. Her stomach tightened. In a few hours, she would be there. In a stranger's home. In a stranger's life. And she had no idea what she would find. The house stood alone against the darkening sky. Clara studied it from the buckboard seat, taking in every detail while the horse stamped impatiently in the traces. The walls were weathered gray, the wood bleached by years of sun and wind. A section of the front fence had collapsed inward, posts leaning at angles that defied gravity. What might once have been a garden was now a tangle of weeds and wild grass, choking whatever had tried to grow there. But the chimney was straight. The windows were intact. And smoke, she could see it now. Thin wisps rising from somewhere inside, which meant there was a stove that worked. Ain't much to look at, Silas said. I know. Clara kept her eyes on the house, on the sagging porch, the door that hung slightly crooked on its hinges, the curtains in the window that might have been white once, but were now the color of old dishwater. I've seen worse, she said. She climbed down before he could offer his hand. The ground was hard beneath her feet, packed dirt and dried grass that crunched with each step. She walked toward the house slowly, her skirt brushing against the weeds that grew along what must have once been a path. Behind her, she heard Silas unhitch the horse, heard the jingle of harness and the soft sound of hooves on earth. The porch steps groaned under her weight. One of them had a crack running through the middle, and she stepped over it carefully, testing the next board before putting her full weight down. The door was unlocked. She pushed it open and stepped inside. Dust. That was the first thing. Dust everywhere, coating every surface, hanging in the air like fog. It caught the last light of the setting sun that came through the window and turned it golden, almost beautiful. If you didn't think about what it meant, the room was small. A table in the center oak. She could tell even through the grime. Solid and well made. 2 chairs, mismatched, one with a broken rung, a cook stove in the corner, black iron streaked with rust and old grease. Pots and pans hung from hooks on the wall, their surfaces dull with disuse. A basin sat on a shelf near the window. filled with dishes that looked like they'd been there for days. Clara walked further in. Her shoes left prints in the dust on the floor. There was a bed against the far wall, the blankets twisted and thrown back. A pillow that had lost most of its stuffing. The mattress sagged in the middle. Above the bed, someone had hung a small wooden cross, plain and unvarnished. And in the corner, almost hidden in the shadows, a shelf of books. She moved toward it without thinking. 5 books, maybe 6. Their spines cracked and faded. She ran her finger along them, leaving a clean line in the dust. One title caught her eye, gold letters on brown leather, barely visible. "You read," Silas's voice came from the doorway. She hadn't heard him come in. "When there ain't nothing else to do," she said, throwing his own words back at him. She pulled the book from the shelf. "That Longfellow?" Silas didn't move from the door. His hat was in his hands now, turning slowly between his fingers. "Ma's. She liked poetry." Liked a pause, long enough that Clara could hear the wind picking up outside, rattling something loose on the roof. "I'll see to the horse," Silas said. He was gone before she could respond. Clara stood alone in the dusty room, holding a dead woman's book. The leather cover was soft from years of handling, worn smooth at the corners where fingers had gripped it. She opened it carefully, and a pressed flower fell out, a wildflower, purple once, now faded to gray. Someone had written on the inside cover, the ink brown with age, "For my Silas, on his 10th birthday. May you always find beauty in words. Mother." She closed the book and put it back on the shelf. The broom was leaning against the wall near the stove, its bristles worn down to stubs. Clara picked it up and started sweeping. The dust rose in clouds around her, making her eyes water, coating her throat. She didn't stop. She swept the floor from one end to the other, pushing the dirt toward the door, watching it pile up against the threshold. When she finished the floor, she moved to the table. She found a rag in the basin, damp and sour-smelling. But it would do, and wiped down the surface. The wood underneath was beautiful, dark and rich, with a grain that swirled like water in a stream. She cleaned it until it gleamed, until she could see her own reflection looking back at her. Who made this? She hadn't heard Silas come back. He was standing in the doorway again, a bucket of water in one hand. "My pa," he said. Clara traced the edge of the table with her finger. "He was good. He was." Silas set the bucket down near the stove. He stood there for a moment, looking around the room like he was seeing it for the first time. His eyes moved from the swept floor to the clean table, to the books on the shelf, now arranged neatly instead of jumbled together. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "I know." She turned to the stove. The fire inside had burned down to embers, barely glowing. She found kindling in a box nearby, added it carefully, blew on the coals until they caught. The flames rose, casting orange light across the walls. "You got beans?" she asked. "Bacon." Silas pointed to a cabinet near the basin. "Should be some in there. Ain't much." There wasn't. A tin of beans, half empty, a slab of bacon wrapped in paper, dried out at the edges, flour that had gone slightly gray. A jar of something that might have been jam once, but had turned to a color that made her stomach turn. In the back, She found a small wooden box with packets of old seeds inside basil, mint, sage. The paper soft and faded. She worked with what she had. The beans went into a pot with water from the bucket. The bacon she sliced thin, rendering the fat in a pan until it sizzled and popped. The bread from their earlier meal she tore into pieces and added to the bacon grease, letting it soak up the flavor. Silas sat at the table. She could feel him watching her, though she didn't turn around. "You know your way around a kitchen," he said. "Worked in one for 3 years, boarding house in Philadelphia." She stirred the beans. Learned quick, or went hungry. The meal came together slowly. Clara found plates in the basin, washed them in what was left of the water, dried them on her skirt. She divided the food evenly and set one plate in front of Silas. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he looked at her. "Thank you," he said. The words came out rough, like he'd forgotten how to say them. Clara sat across from him. The table between them was clean now, the oak gleaming in the lamplight. She picked up her fork. They ate in silence. The beans were bland, the bacon tough, the bread soggy with grease. But it was hot, and it was food, and it was the first meal Clara had eaten at a real table in longer than she could remember. When they finished, Silas pushed his plate back. He opened his mouth like he was going to say something, then closed it again. He stood, walked to the door, stood there looking out at the darkness. "There's a room," he said, still facing away from her. "Behind the stove, small, but it's got a bed, clean sheets in the chest." Clara looked at the door he was pointing to. She hadn't noticed it before, half hidden in the shadows. "Where will you sleep?" she asked. Silas turned. His face was half in shadow, half in the orange glow of the stove. "I'll figure something out." He stepped outside and pulled the door closed behind him. Clara sat alone at the clean oak table. In the dusty house of a man she'd known for less than a day, the fire crackled in the stove. The wind moaned against the walls. Somewhere outside, she heard Silas's footsteps moving away. And then nothing. She walked to the small door and pushed it open. The room was tiny, barely large enough for the narrow bed and a wooden chest. But there was a window, and through it, she could see stars, more stars than she'd ever seen in her life, scattered across the sky like someone had spilled a jar of diamonds on black velvet. On the pillow, someone had laid a quilt, old and faded, the stitches uneven in places, but the pattern was clear, interlocking circles in shades of blue and gray. Clara touched it with trembling fingers. She knew those stitches, knew that pattern. Her mother had made one just like it, years ago, for a trousseau that never got used. She sank onto the bed, the quilt clutched in her hands, and wondered who had slept here before her, and why they had left. The smell of coffee woke her. Clara opened her eyes to pale light filtering through the small window above her bed. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. The ceiling was wrong, lower than the boarding house, made of rough planks instead of cracked plaster. Then the memory came back. The train station. The man with the quiet eyes. The long ride through the prairie. She was in his house, in his mother's room. She now suspected, wrapped in a quilt made by hands that had been still for years. The coffee smell was stronger now, rich and dark, curling under the door and pulling her from the bed. She dressed quickly in the dim light, fumbling with buttons, smoothing her hair back with fingers that still felt clumsy from sleep. When she pushed open the door, she found the main room empty. The stove was lit, flames crackling behind the iron door. A copper pot sat on top, steam rising from its spout. 2 tin cups waited on the table she had cleaned last night, still gleaming in the morning light. The front door was open. Through it, she could see Silas crossing the yard, carrying a coil of wire over one shoulder. He moved with the slow, deliberate pace of a man who had learned that hurrying only wasted energy. Clara poured herself a cup of coffee and sat at the table. The liquid was hot and bitter, strong enough to make her eyes water. She drank it anyway. The days took shape around them like water finding its level. Clara cleaned. She scrubbed the floors until the wood showed through, pale and smooth beneath years of grime. She washed the windows with vinegar and old newspapers, watching the glass transform from clouded to clear. She attacked the basin of dishes, the grease-caked pots, the corners where dust had settled so thick it had turned to felt. Silas worked outside. She heard him from morning to night, the ring of his hammer, the scrape of his saw, the occasional grunt when something didn't go the way he wanted. He was rebuilding the fence, she learned, replacing posts that had rotted through with new ones cut from timber he'd been saving. Sometimes she saw him at the table in the evening, scratching notes on scraps of paper supplies he needed, measurements for lumber, things he couldn't afford to forget. They met at meals, breakfast before the sun was fully up, the sky still pink at the edges, dinner when the shadows grew long and the heat of the day began to fade. The conversations were short at first, just the necessary words. Pass the salt. More coffee. There's biscuits if you want 'em. But the silences between the words grew easier, less like gaps to be filled, and more like spaces where filling wasn't needed. On the third morning, Clara found the patch of ground behind the house. It was small, maybe 10 feet square, choked with weeds and wild grass. But when she pulled some of the growth away, the soil underneath was dark and rich. The kind of soil her mother used to call good growing dirt. She knelt there for a long time, running the earth through her fingers, feeling its weight and texture. Silas found her there when he came around the corner carrying a bucket of nails. "Mind if I plant something here?" she asked. He looked at the patch, then at her hands, still dark with soil. Something moved across his face, not quite a smile, but something in that direction. "It's your kitchen," he said. "Plant what you want." She found the seeds in the back of the pantry, the packets she'd noticed that first night, tucked into a wooden box that had probably belonged to his mother. Basil, mint, sage. The paper was faded and soft with age, but when she opened them, the seeds inside were still good. She could tell by the weight of them, the way they felt between her fingers. She planted them that afternoon, while the sun beat down on her back and sweat soaked through her dress. Row by row, seed by seed, pressing each one into the earth and covering it gently, like tucking a child into bed. On the 5th day, the roof began to leak. It started with a drip in the corner near the stove, a steady plinking sound that woke Clara in the middle of the night. By morning, the drip had become a stream, and a puddle was spreading across the floor she had worked so hard to clean. "Gonna need to patch that," Silas said, looking up at the ceiling. "Should have done it months ago." "I'll help." He looked at her. She couldn't read his expression surprise. Maybe. Or something else. You ever been on a roof? No. It ain't easy work. Neither is scrubbing floors on your hands and knees, but I manage that just fine. The corner of his mouth twitched. Heat of the afternoon. Silas climbed the ladder he'd built himself, rough pine, the rungs worn smooth from use, and Clara stayed below, passing up tools and supplies when he called for them. Hammer? She handed it up. Handle first, the way her mother had taught her to pass knives. Nails? A handful from the bucket, the iron warm from the sun. That board there, the short one. She found it, lifted it over her head, felt his fingers brush against hers as he took it. The work was slow. The sun was brutal. But somewhere in the middle of it, they started talking, really talking, not just the necessary words. Your pa teach you carpentry? Clara asked, shielding her eyes against the glare. Silas drove a nail with 3 precise strokes. Some. The rest I figured out myself. Figured out pretty good. I'd say. He paused, the hammer suspended in midair. When he looked down at her, his face was unreadable against the bright sky. First time anybody said that? First time I seen a roof didn't leak. He laughed. The sound was rusty, like a hinge that hadn't been used in years. But it was real. They kept talking as the afternoon wore on. Small things at first, the weather, the state of the fence, whether the well was deep enough to last through summer. But the small things led to bigger ones, the way streams lead to rivers. Clara told him about her mother, about the tiny apartment above the tailor's shop, the way it smelled of wool and lamp oil, the sound of the sewing machine running late into the night, about the cough that started small and grew until it was all there was, about the morning she woke up and the apartment was silent for the first time in her memory. Silas told her about his father, about the man who had built this house with his own hands, who had carved the table and hung the cross and planted the first seeds in the garden that was now overgrown, about the winter that wouldn't end, the cold that settled into the old man's chest and wouldn't leave, about the grave behind the barn, marked with a wooden cross that Silas had made himself because there was no one else to make it. Pneumonia, he said. Doc said it was quick. At least, said he probably didn't feel much toward the end. Clara didn't say she was sorry. The word seemed too small for what she was hearing. Instead, she handed up another board, and their fingers touched again. And neither of them pulled away. That night, Clara sat on the porch with the Longfellow book in her lap. The lamp was lit inside, casting a warm glow through the window. The stars were coming out, one by one, scattered across the darkening sky. She was reading a poem about the sea when she heard it. Music, soft and slow, drifting through the open door. A harmonica, the notes wavering slightly, like a voice that hadn't been used in a long time. The melody was unfamiliar, something old, something sad, something that made her think of empty rooms and letters never sent. Clara closed the book. She sat very still, listening, as the music rose and fell like breathing. She didn't go inside. She didn't ask what song it was or who had taught him to play. She just listened, the way you listen to rain on a roof or wind through the trees. The song ended. The last note hung in the air, fading slowly into silence. The door creaked. Footsteps. Silas came out onto the porch and stood there, the harmonica still in his hand. He didn't sit down. he just stood, looking out at the stars. "Ain't played that in 2 years," he said. Clara didn't ask why he had played it tonight. She didn't need to. They stood there together in the darkness, not speaking, not touching, just existing in the same space. The night was warm, the stars were bright, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote began to howl. "Silas, yeah, what happened to your mother?" The question came out before she could stop it. She felt him stiffen beside her, felt the air between them change. He didn't answer for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, harder, older. "That ain't a story for tonight." He turned and went inside. And the door closed behind him with a sound like a period at the end of a sentence. Clara sat alone on the porch, the book still in her lap, and wondered what kind of wound could make a man go silent for 2 years, and whether she would ever know the truth of it. 3 weeks had changed the garden. Clara knelt in the dirt, her hands black to the wrists, watching the first green shoots push up through the soil. The basil was coming in strong, tiny leaves unfurling toward the sun. The mint was spreading already, sending runners out in every direction like it couldn't wait to claim more ground. Even the sage had sprouted, pale gray-green against the dark earth. She had done this. She had taken dead seeds and dry soil and turned them into something alive. The watering can was nearly empty. She stood, brushing dirt from her skirt, a hopeless gesture. The fabric was stained beyond saving, and walked toward the well. The sun was high and hot, pressing down on her shoulders, making her squint against the glare. That was when she heard the hoofbeats. A rider was coming up the trail, moving fast, kicking up a cloud of dust that hung in the still air like smoke. Clara shielded her eyes with one hand and watched him approach. Not Silas, the horse was wrong. A bay instead of the gray mare he rode. Someone from town. Maybe a neighbor she hadn't met. The rider pulled up at the edge of the yard. He was young, maybe 25, with a face that hadn't seen much hardship and clothes that were too clean for ranch work. His hat was new, the brim still stiff, and there was a silver pin on his vest that caught the light. "Miss Whitmore." Clara's stomach dropped. She knew that pin. She'd seen it described in letters. Sketched in the margins a stylized H surrounded by cattle horns. "Who's asking?" The rider dismounted, holding the reins loosely in one gloved hand. "Name's Hank. I work for Mr. Harrison." He looked her over, taking in the dirt on her hands, the stains on her dress, the hair that had come loose from its pins. "Mr. Harrison sends his regards. Miss, says he made a mistake, wants to talk." The words hit her like a slap. "A mistake," she repeated. Her voice sounded strange in her own ears, flat and hollow. Hank nodded. He had the look of a man delivering a message he didn't particularly care about. The words rehearsed and empty. "He's been thinking about it. Says he acted hasty. Says he'd like a chance to make things right." The watering can slipped from Clara's fingers. It hit the ground with a dull clang, water spilling out across the dirt, darkening it to mud. She stared at the spreading puddle and couldn't make herself move. "He's a rich man. Miss," Hank continued, "could give you a good life, big house, servants, everything you could want. All you gotta do is come back with me." Hear what he has to say." Clara's throat was tight. Her hands had started to shake. She pressed them against her thighs to hide it. "He could have given me that a month ago," she said. "People change their minds. And some people don't get a second chance to make up theirs." The words came out harder than she intended. Hank's eyebrows rose slightly, but he didn't argue. He just shrugged, like her answer was a minor inconvenience. "Suit yourself," he said. "But he ain't gonna wait forever. A man like Mr. Harrison. He's got options. He's being generous. Giving you another chance after I what?" Hank stopped. His eyes flicked over her again, the dirt, the sweat, the rough fabric of her work dress. When he spoke, his voice had changed, colder, more honest. "After you ended up here," he said, "living in a shack with a man who can barely string 2 words together, scrubbing floors and planting weeds like some kind of hired girl," he smiled, and there was something cruel in it. "Mr. Harrison heard about your situation. Buford mentioned it when he came through town last week. Felt sorry for you, I guess. Figured you might want a way out before you sink any lower." The shame hit her before the anger did. It rose up from somewhere deep in her chest, hot and choking, filling her throat until she couldn't breathe. She looked down at her hands, cracked and dirty, the nails broken, the skin rough from work, and saw them the way Hank must see them, the way Harrison must see them. The hands of a servant, a failure, a woman who had fallen so far she'd be grateful for scraps. "Get out." The words were barely a whisper. "What's that?" "I said get out." She stepped toward him. Her foot caught on the overturned watering can. She stumbled, arms flailing, and went down hard, not onto the packed dirt of the path, but into the mud she'd made when the water spilled. Her hands sank in up to the wrists. Her knees hit with a wet smack. Mud splattered across her dress, her face, her hair. Hank laughed. The sound was short and sharp, cut off quickly. But she heard it. She heard exactly what it meant. Clara pushed herself up. Mud dripped from her chin. Her elbows, the front of her dress. She could feel it seeping through the fabric, cold against her skin. When she tried to wipe her face, she only smeared it worse. "I'll tell Mr. Harrison you ain't interested," Hank said. He was already mounting his horse, turning away. "Though I reckon he'll hear about this too. Might give him a good laugh." He rode off without looking back. The dust from his horse's hooves settled slowly over the yard, over the garden, over Clara still kneeling in the mud. She stayed there. The sun beat down. A fly landed on her arm, and she didn't brush it away. The mud was starting to dry on her skin, cracking at the edges, pulling tight. She heard footsteps behind her, boots on packed earth, then silence. "What did he say to you?" Silas's voice. She couldn't turn around, couldn't let him see her face. "Nothing that matters." A long pause. She heard him shift his weight, heard the creak of leather from his belt. "Clara, please," the word came out broken. "Just please." She pushed herself to her feet. Her legs were shaking. She walked past him without looking up. Through the door, across the room she had cleaned so carefully, leaving muddy footprints on the floor she had scrubbed on her hands and knees. She went into the small bedroom and closed the door behind her. The latch clicked into place. The room was dark and close. the window too small to let in much light. Clara stood in the center of it, dripping mud onto the clean quilt, and felt something inside her crack open like a dam giving way. She slid down the wall until she was sitting on the floor, her back pressed against the rough wood. Her knees came up to her chest. The mud on her dress was cold now, soaking through to her skin. Outside. She heard Silas moving around, heard the scrape of a pot, the clank of a ladle, the crackle of the stove being stoked, smelled food cooking beans, maybe, and bacon. Later, she didn't know how much later, footsteps approached her door. They stopped just outside. She heard him breathing. A soft thud. Something being set down. "You ain't gotta talk," Silas said through the door. "But you gotta eat." The footsteps retreated. The front door opened and closed. Clara sat in the dark for a long time. The smell of food drifted under the door, mixing with the smell of mud and sweat and shame. Her stomach cramped with hunger. But she didn't move. The light faded. The room grew darker. Outside, she heard the coyotes start up, their voices rising and falling in the distance. Finally, when the house had been silent for hours. She opened the door. The plate was there on the threshold, beans and bacon on white china. A fork laid neatly beside it, cold now. The grease congealed, the beans dried at the edges. Clara sank down onto the floor. Her fingers closed around the fork. She brought the first bite to her mouth. It was cold and tasteless and perfect. She ate every bite, sitting on the cold floor in her mud-stained dress, and when the plate was empty, she pressed her hands to her face and let the tears come. Not for Harrison. Not for the life she'd lost. For the man who had cooked her dinner and left it at her door without asking for anything in return. When she finally wiped her eyes and looked up, she saw something she hadn't noticed before. A piece of paper, tucked under the edge of the plate. She unfolded it with trembling fingers. 2 words, written in a rough hand. "Stay, please." Clara woke before dawn. The room was still dark. The window a gray rectangle against the black wall. She lay there for a long time, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of the quilt on her chest. Her dress from yesterday lay crumpled in the corner where she'd thrown it stiff with dried mud, ruined beyond repair. She'd changed into her second dress, the plain brown one, and fallen asleep with her hair still damp from the basin. The note was in her hand. She'd held it all night, even in sleep. The paper soft now from the heat of her palm. "Stay, please." 2 words. 8 letters. The most anyone had asked of her in years. She could leave. She could walk out that door, down the trail, back to town, find a way to California. Maybe, or back east. Start over again, the way she'd started over before. She'd done it once. She could do it again. But her feet didn't want to move toward the door. They wanted to move toward the porch, toward the smell of coffee that was already drifting through the house, toward the man who had written those 2 words and left them for her to find. She got up. She smoothed her hair. She opened the door. Silas was sitting on the porch, his back against the post, a tin cup in his hands. There was a second cup on the step beside him, steam rising from it in the cool morning air. He didn't turn when she came out. He just sat there, looking at the sky, watching the first pink light spread across the horizon. Clara picked up the cup. The tin was hot against her fingers. She sat down on the step, not next to him, but close. Closer than she'd sat before. "I ain't goin'," she said. Silas nodded. He didn't ask why. He didn't say anything at all. He just took a sip of his coffee and kept watching the sky. The silence stretched between them, but it was different now, softer, like a blanket instead of a wall. "That harmonica," Clara said finally. "Where'd you learn to play?" Silas was quiet for so long she thought he wasn't going to answer. Then he shifted, setting his cup down on the boards beside him. "Ma taught me," he said. "When I was a boy, she used to play every night after supper. Said it helped her think." He paused. "After she passed, Pa kept the harmonica in a drawer, wouldn't let nobody touch it. Said it hurt too much to hear it." "How old were you when she passed?" 12. Clara wrapped her hands around her cup, feeling the heat seep into her bones. 12 years old, just a child. She tried to imagine what that must have been like, losing your mother at that age, watching your father close himself off, growing up in a house full of silence. What happened to her? Silas picked up his cup again. He turned it in his hands, watching the coffee swirl. "Fever," he said. "Came on sudden, in the spring. Pa rode to town for the doc, but by the time he got back..." He stopped, shook his head. "She was gone before I could say goodbye." The words hung in the air between them. Clara didn't say she was sorry. She knew how empty those words could sound. "My pa never got over it." Silas continued. "He kept on workin', kept on livin', but something in him died with her. He stopped talkin' much, stopped laughin', just worked and slept and worked some more." He took a long breath. "When he passed last winter, I think part of him was relieved. He'd been waiting to see her again for 16 years. Clara set her cup down. Her hands were trembling, just slightly. "My mother was a seamstress," she said. "She worked in a shop in Philadelphia, making dresses for rich ladies, 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, bent over a needle until her eyes went bad and her fingers bled." She paused. "My father left when I was 7, just walked out one morning and never came back. She raised me alone after that." Silas turned to look at her. His eyes were dark in the early light, unreadable. "She got sick 3 years ago," Clara continued. "Consumption. The coughing started small, but it got worse and worse until she couldn't work anymore. I took care of her until the end. Held her hand when she..." Her voice broke. She pressed her lips together, waiting for the tightness in her throat to ease. "After she was gone, I had nothing. No family. No money. No prospects. I saw Harrison's advertisement in the paper, and I thought..." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I thought it was my chance, my one chance to start over. And he threw it away. He did." They sat in silence. The sun was fully up now, painting the prairie in shades of gold and amber. A hawk circled overhead, riding the morning thermals. "You ever think about leaving this place?" Clara asked. Silas was quiet for a moment. "Every winter. What stops you?" He looked out at the land at the fence he'd rebuilt, the garden she'd planted, the house that had been standing since before he was born. "This is where they're buried," he said. "Ma and Pa both. Behind the barn, under the cottonwood. I can't leave 'em here alone." Clara followed his gaze. She could see the tree from here, its branches spreading wide against the sky. She hadn't noticed the graves before, but now she could make out 2 small mounds beneath it, marked with wooden crosses. Maybe that's a good enough reason to stay, she said. Silas turned to look at her. Their eyes met. And something passed between them, something that didn't need words. Maybe now there's another one, he said. Clara felt heat rise to her cheeks. She looked down at her hands, at the calluses that had formed over the past weeks, at the dirt under her nails that no amount of scrubbing seemed to remove. I want to write him a letter, she said. Harrison, I've been thinking about it for days now. I want him to know. She stopped. I don't know what I want him to know, just that I'm not what he thinks I am. You need paper. If you have some. Silas went inside and came back with a sheet of cream-colored paper, a pen, and a small bottle of ink. He set them on the step beside her and sat back down, not watching, not asking. Just there. Clara dipped the pen in the ink. The nib scratched against the paper as she wrote. Mr. Harrison, I received your message. I will not be coming to see you. A month ago, I thought you were my only chance at a new life. I thought without you, I had nothing. I was wrong. I found where I belong. Thank you for showing me it wasn't with you, Clara Whitmore. She set the pen down. The ink was still wet, gleaming in the morning light. She read the words again, then once more, making sure they said what she meant them to say. Want to hear it? She asked. Silas looked at her. Only if you want me to. She read it aloud. Her voice was steady now, stronger than it had been. When she finished, she looked up at him. His shoulders moved a small tremor, barely visible. His jaw was tight. He was looking out at the prairie, at the endless stretch of grass and sky. But she could see something glistening at the corner of his eye. That's good, he said. His voice was rough. That's real good. Clara folded the letter and set it aside. She would find a way to send it later, give it to someone heading to town. Maybe. Or take it herself. But for now, it was enough just to have written it. Come on, she said, standing up. I want to plant something. They walked around the house to the small shed where Silas kept his tools. Inside, on a dusty shelf beside packets of nails and coils of wire. Clara found seeds she'd noticed days ago but hadn't touched. Sunflowers? The picture on the front showed tall stalks with golden heads, bright as small suns. These, she said, in front of the porch. Silas took the shovel from its hook on the wall. They walked back around to the front of the house, to the bare patch of earth between the porch steps and the path. He dug while she watched, turning over the hard-packed soil until it was loose and dark. Deep enough, he asked. Clara knelt beside the hole. She opened the packet and shook a few seeds into her palm, small and striped. Impossibly light. She placed them in the earth, one by one, pressing each one down with her thumb. Silas filled in the hole. Their hands brushed as they worked the soil together, smoothing it flat. How long till they grow? He asked. A few weeks, maybe a month. They'll be tall by summer's end. They stood up. Their shoulders were almost touching. Clara looked at the patch of earth they'd planted together, and something bubbled up in her chest, something light and unfamiliar. She laughed. The sound surprised her. It had been so long since she'd heard herself laugh that she barely recognized it. But once it started, she couldn't stop. She laughed until her eyes watered, until her stomach hurt, until Silas was looking at her like she'd lost her mind. And then he laughed, too. It was a rusty sound, creaky and unused, like a door that hadn't been opened in years. But it was real. It was his. They stood there in front of the house, laughing together over a patch of dirt and a handful of seeds. And Clara realized something that made her breath catch in her chest. This was the first time she'd heard him laugh. In all the weeks she'd been here, through all the meals and conversations and long silences, she had never once heard him laugh. Until now. She looked at him, really looked, and saw something in his face that hadn't been there before. Something open. Something hopeful. "Silas," she said. "Yeah." "What was her name? Your mother?" He was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was soft. "Clara," he said. Her name was Clara. The basil had grown past Clara's ankle now. She knelt in the garden, the soil warm beneath her knees, and pinched off a handful of leaves. The smell rose up immediately, sharp and green, so strong it made her eyes water. She added them to the basket beside her, already half full with mint and sage, and the first small tomatoes from the vines she'd planted along the fence that Silas had finished rebuilding. Every post straight, every rail level, the wood pale and new against the weathered gray of the house. She stood and brushed the dirt from her dress. Her third dress now, the one she'd sewn herself from fabric bought in town last week. Blue calico. Like the one she'd arrived in, but different. This one she'd made with her own hands. This one fit, across the yard. She could hear the ring of Silas's hammer. He was working on the last section of fence, the part near the road, driving nails with steady, even strokes. She watched him for a moment, the way his shoulders moved, the economy of his motion, the pause between each swing to check his work. He'd changed too, though she couldn't have said exactly how. He stood straighter, maybe, moved with more purpose. And he talked now, not a lot, never a lot, but enough. Enough to fill the silences that used to stretch between them like empty rooms. The hammer stopped. Silas stepped back. Looking at the fence he'd built, his head turned, and even from this distance, she could see him taking in the whole of it, the yard, the garden, the house with its mended roof and clean windows. He turned toward her. Their eyes met across the space between them. Clara lifted her basket. "Supper in an hour," she called. He nodded and started walking toward the barn, the hammer still in his hand. The kitchen was warm when she came inside. She'd left the stove burning low, a pot of water already simmering for the potatoes. The room smelled like wood smoke, and the herbs she'd hung to dry above the window bundles of thyme and oregano that swayed gently in the draft. She set the basket on the table. The oak table, gleaming now, polished every week until the grain showed through like rivers on a map. The chairs had been mended too, the broken rungs replaced, the seats worn smooth from use. Clara washed the vegetables in the basin, scrubbing dirt from potato skins, rinsing tomatoes until they shone red as Christmas ornaments. She was slicing the potatoes when she heard the door open behind her. "Fence is done," Silas said. "I saw." He came to stand beside her at the counter, watching her work. His hands were dirty from the day's labor, his shirt dark with sweat. He smelled like sawdust and sun. "You want to help?" Clara asked. "Don't know how." "I'll show you." She handed him the knife and a potato. His fingers closed around the handle, awkward and uncertain. Like this, she said. She put her hand over his, guiding the blade. Thin slices, even as you can get 'em. Silas tried. The first slice came out thick on one end, paper thin on the other. The second was worse. Clara laughed. The sound surprised her, the way it always did, how easily it came now, how natural it felt. Silas looked at her, one eyebrow raised, and something twitched at the corner of his mouth. Ain't that funny, he said. It is from where I'm standing. You want to do it yourself? And miss watching you struggle. Not a chance. He tried again. This time the slice was almost even. Clara nodded. And something shifted in his face, not quite a smile, but close. They worked side by side as the light outside began to change. Clara fried the potatoes in bacon fat while Silas set the table, laying out plates and forks with the same careful precision he brought to everything. The tomatoes she sliced raw, arranging them on a dish with the basil leaves scattered on top, salt and pepper from the small jars on the shelf. They ate at the oak table, the lamp casting golden light across the food, across their faces, across the room that had become something neither of them had expected. Ain't never thought this place could look like a home, Silas said. Clara looked around at the clean floors, the mended curtains, the shelf of books with their spines aligned, at the cross above the bed, the quilt folded at its foot, the harmonica sitting on the windowsill where he'd left it that morning. It just needed somebody to care for it, she said. They finished eating in comfortable silence. Clara cleared the plates while Silas wiped down the table. Their movements fit together now, easy and practiced, like a dance they'd been learning all along without knowing it. Come outside, Silas said. Sun's going down. The porch was warm from the day's heat, the boards smooth beneath her feet. Clara sat on the top step, her back against the post, and watched the sky begin to change. Orange first, then red, then a deep purple that spread from the horizon like ink in water. Silas sat beside her, not touching, but close. Close enough that she could feel the warmth of him through the thin fabric of her sleeve. He reached for the harmonica. The music that came out was different from before. Not the sad, slow melody she'd heard that first night, the one that had made her think of empty rooms and lost chances. This was something else, lighter, almost playful. A tune that made her want to tap her foot, to hum along, to smile. When he finished, the last note hung in the air for a moment before fading into the evening sounds, crickets starting up, a nightbird calling, the distant lowing of cattle from somewhere over the ridge. You gonna play that thing every night now? Clara asked. Silas looked at her. His eyes caught the last of the light, reflecting it back like still water. Only if you gonna listen. I suppose I got nothing better to do. High praise. She laughed again. He smiled a real smile this time, one that reached his eyes and stayed there. They sat in silence as the colors deepened. The sun touched the horizon, flattening into a red disk that seemed to pulse with its own light. The prairie stretched out before them, endless and golden, painted in shades of amber and rust. Silas. Yeah. Clara didn't look at him. She kept her eyes on the horizon, on the sun that was slowly sinking out of sight. That man did me a favor. Didn't he? Silas didn't answer right away. She could feel him beside her, solid and warm, as constant as the land itself. Reckon he did, he said finally. Biggest favor of your life. Mighty confident for a man can't cut a potato straight. I got other talents. She turned to look at him then. His face was half in shadow, half in the warm glow of the dying sun. The lines around his eyes looked softer now, the set of his jaw less rigid. He looked like a man who had finally set down something heavy. Like what? She asked. He didn't answer with words. Instead, his hand moved. Slowly, carefully, like he was approaching a wild animal he didn't want to spook. His fingers found hers on the worn wood of the porch step. They were rough and warm, calloused from years of labor. Clara didn't pull away. She turned her hand over, palm up, and felt his fingers interlace with hers. The grip was gentle but firm, certain. The sun slipped below the horizon. The sky turned from red to purple to a deep, velvety blue. Stars began to appear. One by one, scattered across the darkness like seeds waiting to grow. They sat there together on the porch of the house he'd been born in, the house she'd come to by accident, the house that had somehow become theirs. The garden she'd planted was behind them, the fence he'd built before them, and between them was something neither of them had expected to find. Clara leaned her head against his shoulder. He didn't stiffen. He didn't pull away. He just sat there, solid and warm, his hand holding hers while the night settled over the prairie. Somewhere in the darkness, a coyote began to howl. Another answered. The sounds rose and fell, wild and strange and somehow beautiful. Silas. Yeah, I'm glad he didn't come. His grip tightened on her hand. When he spoke, his voice was rough. Me too. The stars multiplied overhead, filling the sky with light. The air grew cool, the coyotes fell silent, and on the porch of a small house in the middle of nowhere, two people who had been waiting their whole lives finally stopped. There is a kind of quiet that settles after a story like this one. Not empty, but full the way a room feels after someone has finally said what needed saying. Perhaps you felt it too. That tender ache when Clara sat in the mud, or the catch in your chest when Silas left dinner at her door. These feelings don't need to be explained. They simply are. Many of us have known what it is to wait for someone who never came. Some of us have carried that weight for years, folded it small and tucked it somewhere deep where we thought no one could see. And perhaps, like Clara, we've been surprised to find that the thing we were waiting for had already arrived, just wearing a different face than we expected. It's all right if this story stirred something you haven't touched in a while. It's okay to let it rest there, unresolved. The way some things in life simply are. Not every door needs closing. Not every question needs an answer. The prairie is quiet now. The stars are out. And somewhere, two people are sitting on a porch, holding hands, saying nothing at all. Thank you for staying until the end. It has been a gift to share this time with you.